Hello everybody, Maven here, and the huge update is here, so it's time we find out once and for all, are heavy grenade launchers the new meta instead of rocket launchers? I already did videos on both of these buffs a couple weeks ago, and I just used a calculator to figure out how the buff would apply. And due to my calculations then, I figured heavy grenade launchers would be the new meta. But we're just gonna find out here, now that we have the buff in our hands, were those calculations correct? So there are a lot of patch notes here. Let me read them off for you. So for rocket launchers, precision frames and high impact frames are getting 2 more in the reserves. High impact frames are getting more of their damage allocated to their blast radius rather than their impact, making them better for ad clear, but it's still gonna be give or take the same amount of damage if you were to DPS a boss with it. And then precision frames are getting a 5% damage buff, or they're just getting their penalty moving from -10% to -5%. And these buffs also affect the Galley, the Deathbringer, and the Truth. Hint, hint for a future video. And the bait and switch perk is getting a nerf from plus 35% damage to plus 30% damage, meaning the Apex Predator is taking a hit. So therefore, maybe high impacts could potentially be meta instead of that. And there are also a bunch of patch notes for the Heavy GLs. Let me read them off for you here. So 6 to 10 bonus reserves, depending on the grenade launcher. Spike grenades got a huge nerf from 50% down to 12.5%, which is massive, but in turn, they increased the detonation damage by 5% and the direct impact damage by 10%, making with and without spike grenades more close in damage, so you don't absolutely have to run spike grenades to have a competitive grenade launcher. So enough talk, let's get to the testing. And as usual, your interaction means everything to the success of this video, so if you got a second to drop a like and a comment, it really means a lot. And I hope you enjoy. All right, so once again, if you want to see the pre-update damage numbers, you can just go and reference those recent videos I did a couple weeks ago. You can see them there. This is just going to be the updated damage numbers in this video. All right, so let's just jump right into it, starting off with the undisputed king of rocket launchers, the Apex Predator with reconstruction and bait and switch. Bait and switch did get that 5% damage nerf, and it's not benefiting from any reserve mod buffs. So let's jump into Pharizia with Gallarhorns. We can test their maximum potential and see how it can do. So we set the bar here at 1.39 million, definitely not as good as it used to be. And I also felt that bait and switch was a little bit buggy sometimes. Like I felt like I had the perk, but it wasn't doing anything. The nerf really hit it hard, even though it was only 5%. And the next rocket we're gonna try out is our high impact frame. The Semiotician did get hit by the reserve buffs, so it used to be able to hold 10 rockets, now it can hold 12. See how it does. And straight away we get like 100,000 more damage than the Apex Predator, although it did take 3 more rockets to get that damage. So if you're not like a hunter that gets free reloads, it may be a little bit slower DPS, albeit you get more total damage output. And next up, we're gonna move on to the precision frames. We have the Palmyra B with explosive light. It holds the same amount of reserves as the high impact frames, but does less damage, but on the upside you get tracking. So we're more or less just trying to see how it compares to the Apex. And we end up with more than the Apex, 1.43 million. It's just very slightly more, again, very much slower DPS, but you get tracking. So if you ever go up against a boss that is very mobile or very skinny, that's hard to hit with the rocket launcher typically, it's not a bad idea to actually use a Palmyra, and you're not really throwing if you do. So here's a quick little recap of our rocket damage before we move on to the GLs. So honestly, it feels like Apex Predator is still the king of DPS. For total damage output, the Semiotician obviously wins for like longer raid boss encounters, and then the Palmyra is good for those situations where rockets typically aren't viable because they'd be too hard to use. So I think Palmyra is back on the table for certain boss encounters. Otherwise, you're still going to stick with the Apex Predator most likely. But now moving on to the heavy grenade launcher. Starting off with the 120 RPMs, we got the Cataphract Adept here with auto-loading and bait and switch. And I bet you were expecting it to be pretty close, but no, completely blows rocket launchers out of the water. Straight away, just with this alone, I can tell you grenade launchers are the new meta. Because you don't even need a galley person for grenade launchers. So your designated galley user can also throw in a Cataphract, and then everybody's doing crazy DPS. So yes, just with this alone, I can tell you rocket launchers are dead. No more. But we're not done yet. We got the 150 RPMs. We got the Corax's Distress here with Enhanced Surrounded. Normal Surrounded gives you a 40% damage buff, but Enhanced Surrounded gives you a 47% damage buff. And with Reconstruction, we can get off some pretty solid burst damage. So let's see how it does. And the numbers speak for themselves. It is ridiculous, dude. This is the new meta. If you're in any encounter where you can proc surrounded feasibly, this is for sure gonna be your strongest DPS option. That'll easily beat out the Apex Predator. Now, spike nades did get nerfed, so you can probably run something like Augmented Drum, allowing your initial magazine with Reconstruction on this thing to be massive, and that would make the burst even crazier. Your total damage output would suffer a bit. Instead of 1.77 million, it might be just like a flat 1.7 million, but I think that's worth it to have the much greater burst damage. Now let's get a quick overview of all of our damage numbers, and rocket launchers are dead, guys. It's time to move on to a brand new meta. Grenade launchers are back. For those who are newer to Destiny and did not know, grenade launchers used to be the meta back when the original Wendigo came out, the Sunset version. It was the first GL to ever get explosive light, and it was monstrous back then before they nerfed it. Anyways, if you're wondering how the damage looks on the Corax's Distress if you happen to lose Surrounded, I tested it and it was like 1.2 million, so you definitely take a big hit if you don't have Surrounded. So in most situations where you're not confident in Surrounded, you can just use the Cataphract and do good in almost every situation. But like I said in the last video, if you're going to use a Heavy GL in a Grandmaster Nightfall where you're just running and gunning champions, don't have time to be proccing bait and switch or anything like that, the best option is actually going to be Explosive Light. For 120s, the Cataphract gets that, the Regnant gets that, the Wendigo gets that. Those are all pretty solid options. For 150s, the Cosmic is actually going to be the best option from the Halloween event, so we have to wait a little bit before we can get our hands on that. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. I know it's a little bit of a shorter one. I normally like to go more in depth about stuff, and especially the ad clear aspect of heavy grenade launchers I wanted to talk about, but we'll save that for a future video because I got a lot to say. So this is just a quick little PSA. Tell your friends, spread the word, show them this video. Everybody needs to know about this information. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to drop a like and a comment comment. It really helps out a ton. Got a new video on the way tomorrow regarding some exotic changes from this new update that just came out, so definitely stay tuned for that. So if you're new here, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here, and with that, I will catch you in the next video tomorrow. See you then.